The morning sun cast long shadows across Guantánamo Bay on June 15, 2025. At 0600 hours, the USS Tempest, a Mark VI patrol boat, departed Naval Station Guantánamo Bay for routine perimeter security. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell commanded the 35-foot vessel, her crew of 4 Marines scanning the horizon through AN/PVS-14 night vision goggles. The boat's twin Mercury Verado 400 horsepower engines hummed steadily at 12 knots. 2 miles southeast of the base perimeter, Petty Officer Rodriguez spotted movement on the thermal imaging system. Contact bearing 090, range 3,000 yards. He called out, his voice cutting through the engine noise. Mitchell raised her binoculars, focusing on a sleek gray hull approaching from Cuban territorial waters. The vessel identified itself as Che Guevara, a Russian-built Project 1146 patrol boat of the Cuban Revolutionary Navy. Captain Luis Hernandez commanded the Cuban vessel, bristling with twin 23mm Zu-23 autocannons. The Cuban boat's displacement of 240 tons dwarfed the American patrol craft. At 0615 hours, the Che Guevara accelerated to 18 knots, closing the distance rapidly. Mitchell immediately radioed Naval Station Guantánamo Bay Operations Center. Home base, this is Tempest 1, Cuban patrol vessel approaching international boundary. Request guidance. The response crackled through encrypted communications. Tempest 1, maintain position. Monitor, but do not engage. Captain Hernandez ordered his helmsman to position the patrol boat directly across the Americans' intended route. The Cuban vessel's MR-104 rise radar system locked onto the USS Tempest. Mitchell felt her pulse quicken as the gap between vessels closed to 1,500 yards. All hands, general quarters, she commanded, her voice steady despite rising tension. The Marine crew readied their M240 Bravo machine guns mounted on the bow and stern. Sergeant Davis checked the ammunition belts, each gun loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. At 0622 hours, the Cuban boat transmitted on international emergency frequency. American vessel, you are approaching Cuban territorial waters. Alter course immediately. Mitchell responded firmly. Cuban vessel, we are conducting lawful patrol in international waters. The Che Guevara's twin autocannon swiveled toward the American boat. Captain Hernandez studied his GPS coordinates, confirming his position 12 miles from the Cuban coast. His political officer, Major Rivera, urged aggressive action to demonstrate Cuban sovereignty. They mock our nation's dignity, Rivera declared, his fist clenching the radio handset. Hernandez felt the weight of potential international incident pressing on his shoulders. The Cuban captain ordered engine room to increase speed to maximum 22 knots. Meanwhile, at Guantánamo Bay Operations Center, Admiral Thompson monitored the developing situation. Satellite imagery showed both vessels converging on a potentially explosive collision course. Thompson immediately contacted Southern Command headquarters in Miami via secure telephone. Southcom, we have developing maritime incident at Gitmo. Requesting immediate air support authorization, the Cuban patrol boat positioned itself 300 yards directly ahead of the USS Tempest. Mitchell ordered emergency stop, her engines reversing thrust to avoid collision. The American boat's wake churned white foam as it decelerated rapidly from 12 to 4 knots. Cuban sailors visible on deck appeared nervous, repeatedly checking their weapon systems. At 0628 hours, 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters lifted off from Guantánamo Bay Airfield. The helicopters carried Marine Fast team members equipped with M4 carbines and tactical gear. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes commanded the aerial response from the lead Seahawk. Tempest 1, cavalry flight inbound your position, ETA 4 minutes, Barnes radioed. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors echoed across the water. Captain Hernandez observed the American aircraft through high-powered binoculars. He immediately contacted Cuban Air Defense Command in Havana. Control, this is Che Guevara. American helicopters approaching our operational area. Within minutes, Cuban radar stations detected the Seahawks on ANFPS-117 surveillance systems. Major Rivera grabbed the radio microphone with trembling hands. Captain, we must show strength against American aggression, he insisted. Hernandez felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning breeze. The Cuban boat's crew of 18 sailors prepared for potential combat engagement. Lieutenant Mitchell watched her radar screen as the helicopters approached from the northwest. Her communications specialist intercepted Cuban military radio traffic on multiple frequencies. Ma'am, Cubans are reporting this as territorial violation to higher command. He reported. The USS Tempest maintained position, engines idling at minimum power. At 0631 hours, the lead Seahawk arrived overhead at 800 feet altitude. The helicopter's door gunner trained his M240 machine gun on the Cuban vessel. Captain Hernandez ordered his autocannon crews to track the American aircraft. The 23mm guns elevated to 45-degree angle, following the Seahawks' flight path. Tension crackled through radio communications between both military forces. Admiral Thompson received authorization from Washington to demonstrate resolve without escalation. The second Seahawk took position 500 yards south of the confrontation. Marine snipers in the helicopter bay doors acquired targets through high-powered scopes. Staff Sergeant Williams felt his heartbeat accelerate as he aimed at Cuban crew members. The range was 350 yards, well within his rifle's effective engagement distance. Cuban sailors below deck loaded additional ammunition for the autocannons. Each Zu-23 gun carried 200 rounds of high-explosive fragmentation shells. At 0634 hours, a Cuban MiG-29 fighter appeared on American radar screens. The aircraft had scrambled from Jose Marti International Airport, flying at Mach 0.8. Tempest 1, be advised fast mover inbound from Cuban airspace, Operations Center warned. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell felt her mouth go dry as the situation escalated rapidly. The MiG-29 carried R-73 air-to-air missiles and twin GSH-301 cannons. Captain Hernandez received orders from Havana. Maintain position. Do not fire unless fired upon. Major Rivera protested the defensive posture to his superior officers via radio. We appear weak before American cameras recording this humiliation, he argued passionately. The Cuban political officer's face flushed red with frustration and wounded national pride. At 0637 hours, CNN News helicopters arrived at the scene boundaries. International media began broadcasting live coverage of the maritime standoff. The world watched as two nuclear powers faced off in Caribbean waters. Lieutenant Mitchell coordinated with her crew to maintain defensive positions. Petty Officer Rodriguez monitored Cuban radio frequencies, translating intercepted Spanish communications. They're reporting us as invaders violating their sovereign territory, he informed Mitchell. The American patrol boat's crew of 4 felt isolated against overwhelming Cuban forces. Captain Hernandez studied his tactical situation through high-definition periscope system. American helicopters maintained overwatch while additional vessels approached from Guantánamo Bay. The Cuban captain recognized the strategic disadvantage of his isolated position. At 0640 hours, USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, departed Guantánamo Bay. The destroyer's Aegis combat system immediately began tracking all airborne and surface contacts. Captain Reynolds commanded the Porter, her crew of 300 sailors at battle stations. The destroyer's 5-inch gun turret rotated toward the Cuban patrol boat's position. Tomahawk cruise missiles armed in vertical launch tubes created devastating strike capability. Cuban coastal defense radar stations detected the American destroyer's approach. Major Rivera urged Captain Hernandez to request immediate naval reinforcement from Mariel Harbor. The Cuban Navy's largest available vessel was a Coney-class frigate 40 miles away. Hernandez calculated the frigate's arrival time at maximum speed, 90 minutes. His patrol boat would face superior American firepower alone until reinforcements arrived. At 0643 hours, the MiG-29 pilot reported visual contact with American forces. Control. I count 2 helicopters, 1 patrol boat, 1 destroyer approaching. The fighter pilot's hands trembled slightly on the aircraft's control stick. He had trained for air-to-air combat, not complex international incidents requiring political judgment. Below, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell maintained radio silence with the Cuban vessel. Her tactical training emphasized de-escalation while demonstrating American resolve. The USS Tempest crew prepared smoke grenades for emergency concealment if attacked. Marine Sergeant Davis checked his personal sidearm, a standard-issue M17 pistol. The confrontation had lasted 43 minutes without shots fired. At 0645 hours, Cuban coastal artillery batteries received alert status. Soviet-era S-75 Dvina surface-to-air missiles prepared for potential engagement. The missiles could engage targets up to 25 miles from Cuban coastline. Admiral Thompson recognized the expanding scope of potential military confrontation. He authorized F-16 Fighting Falcons to scramble from Homestead Air Reserve Base. The fighters would require 18 minutes to reach Guantánamo Bay airspace. Captain Hernandez felt the psychological pressure of international media attention. His crew looked to him for leadership in an unprecedented situation. The Cuban sailors had trained for coastal defense, not international crisis management. At 0648 hours, both governments activated diplomatic hotlines. The Russian ambassador in Havana contacted the Cuban Ministry of Defense. Moscow advised restraint while supporting Cuban territorial sovereignty claims. Washington instructed Admiral Thompson to avoid actions escalating toward armed conflict. The USS Porter maintained course toward the confrontation at 28 knots. Her advanced radar systems provided real-time targeting data to Fleet Command. Lieutenant Mitchell observed Cuban crew members through high-powered binoculars. She could see the strain on their faces, the uncertainty in their movements. The American officer realized both sides were trapped in escalating political theater. At 0651 hours, Captain Hernandez made a crucial tactical decision. He ordered his helmsman to move 50 yards closer to the American patrol boat. The gap between vessels closed to 250 yards. Mitchell immediately ordered her engines to emergency reverse thrust. The USS Tempest backed away, maintaining safe distance from potential ramming attempt. Major Rivera celebrated the apparent American retreat as victory for Cuban determination. "See how they flee from our revolutionary courage?" he shouted to the crew. Captain Hernandez felt less celebratory, recognizing the dangerous escalation potential. The Cuban boat's forward momentum carried it within 200 yards of American position. At this range, both vessels' weapons could inflict catastrophic damage. 0654 hours marked the crisis's most dangerous moment. The MiG-29 pilot received authorization to conduct low-altitude reconnaissance pass. The fighter descended to 300 feet, flying directly over both naval vessels. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes in the lead Seahawk requested permission to engage the fighter. Negative cavalry flight. Maintain defensive posture only, Admiral Thompson responded. The Cuban fighter's jet engines created tremendous noise and visible intimidation. Sergeant Davis felt his finger unconsciously move toward his machine gun's trigger. Military training warred with political restraint in every sailor's mind. At 0656 hours, international news outlets reported shots fired incorrectly. The false report triggered emergency protocols in both Washington and Havana. Nuclear submarine USS Virginia received emergency service orders from Fleet Command. The submarine had been conducting routine patrol operations 50 miles southeast. Her complement of Tomahawk missiles and torpedo tubes represented overwhelming firepower. Captain Hernandez intercepted American military communications discussing submarine deployment. The Cuban officer realized his patrol boat faced annihilation if fighting commenced. His crew of 18 sailors would stand no chance against American naval power. Major Rivera continued advocating aggressive action, despite overwhelming odds. "We die with honor rather than surrender our sacred territorial waters," he declared. At 0659 hours, both governments issued simultaneous diplomatic statements. Cuba accused the United States of provocative territorial violation and military aggression. Washington countered with routine patrol operations in established international waters. The statements satisfied neither side, while escalating public rhetoric. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell received new orders via encrypted satellite communication. Tempest 1. Maintain current position. Do not withdraw. Do not advance. The American officer felt trapped between Cuban aggression and superiors' expectations. Her crew's safety depended on decisions made by politicians thousands of miles away. At 0702 hours, the USS Porter arrived within visual range. The destroyer's imposing silhouette dominated the horizon like a steel mountain. Captain Reynolds ordered general quarters, his crew of 300 at battle stations. The Porter's radar systems achieved weapons-grade locks on all Cuban contacts. Her phalanx close-in weapons systems tracked the circling MiG-29 automatically. Captain Hernandez observed the American destroyer through his periscope with growing alarm. The Che Guevara's Soviet-era weapons systems were completely outclassed. His patrol boat's maximum range 23mm guns versus 5-inch naval artillery. The tactical mathematics favored American forces by overwhelming margins. At 0704 hours, F-16 fighters appeared on Cuban radar screens. The Fighting Falcons established combat air patrol at 15,000 feet altitude. Their AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles outranged Cuban air defense capabilities. The American fighters carried sufficient ordnance to neutralize coastal battery positions. Major Rivera finally recognized the hopeless military situation facing Cuban forces. His revolutionary fervor cooled as professional military reality became undeniable. The political officer stopped urging Captain Hernandez towards suicidal engagement. At 0707 hours, both sides had achieved maximum force deployment. American naval and air superiority was mathematically and tactically decisive. Cuban forces maintained defensive positions while politically claiming territorial victory. Neither side possessed clear exit strategy from the dangerous confrontation. The standoff had lasted 67 minutes without resolution or violence. International media continued broadcasting live coverage to global audiences. Stock markets in New York and London responded negatively to Caribbean crisis. Oil prices increased by 4% as investors feared broader military conflict. At 0710 hours, Admiral Thompson initiated direct communication with Cuban command. The emergency diplomatic channel had not been used since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Both military leaders recognized the need for face-saving de-escalation measures. The conversation lasted 14 minutes, conducted in English and Spanish simultaneously. Terms included American patrol route modification and Cuban territorial acknowledgement. Neither side admitted fault, while both claimed successful defense of national interests. The agreement required approval from Washington and Havana political leadership. At 0728 hours, both governments announced temporary tactical repositioning. American forces would conduct patrols 2 miles further from Cuban territorial limits. Cuban naval vessels would maintain positions within clearly defined territorial boundaries. The face-saving compromise satisfied domestic political requirements for both nations. Captain Hernandez ordered his patrol boat to withdraw to previously established positions. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell received authorization to resume modified patrol operations. The MiG-29 fighter returned to Jose Marti International Airport. American F-16 fighters maintained combat air patrol for additional 2 hours. The USS Porter remained on station until all Cuban forces departed the area. International media declared the incident resolved through diplomatic channels. Both governments claimed successful defense of national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Military analysts recognized the confrontation's potential for catastrophic escalation. The Caribbean standoff highlighted ongoing tensions between nuclear-armed neighboring powers. Neither side achieved decisive victory, ensuring future incidents remained probable.